talk a little bit more, that phrase that you used was so poignant about the spaces in between, that in terms of treaty making, that I'll just take this so I can be heard a little bit better. To what extent was that been carried down among, in terms of knowledge as far as Mi'kmaq history, that this was the understanding of treaty making and making that understood? If that makes any sense what I was talking about. Because I love the way that you use that all of that knowledge about resources, about how the land is used, etc., that the Mi'kmaq brought to that process, and that they understood in the treaty making, but even though it wasn't necessarily in the language, it was, I think, if I understood what you were saying, Trevor, in those spaces in between. And
I think, like Daniel Paul argues in his book, in that chapter, that a lot of Mi'kmaq leaders did not understand what they were signing with the ratification in 1725. And after the conflict comes back and Halifax begins, Halifax is created and the fortress is made and the Scalping Proclamation is set out and there's conflict happening, the chiefs in Cape Breton that are allied with the French at that time, they come together and they, with the help of a French missionary as well, they write a letter to the Lords of Trade and Cornwallis before the development of 1752 and the treaty there. And they put in this letter a word, Wejiscaliatic. They put this word in this letter. And I think the chiefs in Cape Breton in 1749, 1750, what they were trying to do is to get Cornwallis to understand our view of the land. And what I meant by these spaces in between when we're trying to protect our fishing rights and what it is that we're protecting. And it's this concept, this word that these chiefs in Cape Breton put in this letter. For hundreds of years, this letter was thought to be as a declaration of war. And it was one of the precursors to Cornwallis kind of flipping the bird to everybody and doing the Scalping Proclamation. And he really did not agree to what these chiefs were saying. They put in this letter again, Wejiscaliatic. So when it was translated, it was this letter was saying, basically in a nutshell, if you don't respect our land and if you keep building houses on it and fortresses and whatnot, and not telling us, then you're going to go into active war. It's what they thought. I think that's what they believed it said, but it didn't. We found out, and a lot of other, with a lot of help with some linguists and stuff, got this letter broken down again, translated from Mi'kmaq to English instead of being translated from Mi'kmaq to French into English, which lost translation. So this concept of Wejiscaliatic in this letter kind of sets the events of understanding, I guess. Even though Cornwallis seen it as a declaration of war, I think he had an understanding of where Mi'kmaq people were coming from. Wejiscaliatic translates to, this is where I sprouted from. I sprouted from here. I sprouted from here. And after that, it translated to, this is where I sprouted from. I sprouted from the land like the leaves, the grass, and the limbs. You cannot own me because I am a part of the land, and you can't own the land because it's a part of me. You're kind of like all together. That was the understanding in that letter when he wrote it, signed by all the chiefs and sent to Edward Cornwallis. And at the time, it's not very even clear if he understood what it is what they were saying, but that's the writing in between the lines is Wejiscaliatic. Because in Wejiscaliatic, even though it's just a word, it's a descriptive word in our language trying to imply on how we see ourselves in nature. And I'll try to break it down as quick as I can. My understanding of it. So when we're talking about our place in this world and how we view ourselves living on the land, when we say we sprout from here, this is where we sprout from. I sprouted from this land like the leaves, the grass, and the limbs. What I'm saying is that I am part of this land, and my ancestors are part of this land. We had a few elders try to break this down for us, and this is kind of what they said. Like, in general terms, Wet'suwet'en is literally a word that's describing something sprouted up out of the land when you're using the word. But when you're using it in an explanation like this, what you're doing is you're explaining to the individual who's listening to you that I is sprouted from this land. I am that grass. I am those limbs. I am those trees, and I am the flowers, because when I die, my body goes into the ground. My ground becomes the soil. I sprout up and I become the grass. So everywhere my ancestors are. My ancestors are everywhere. They're part of everything. Everything that has a spirit is part of my ancestors. And the animals eat this, and the animals eat that. We eat the animals. You know, Simba, Pride Rock, you know, everything the light touches kind of stuff. This is the circle of life. But this is Wet'suwet'en, because we view this as a cycle that's existed for thousands of years. This is something that the Mi'kmaq people view themselves as we are no greater than the moose, we are no greater than the caribou, the seals, the fish. We are no greater than any of them. We're not above them, they're not above us. The trees are not above us, and we not are above them. We are equal. For 13,000 years, we had to understand that, to live here successfully, season and season and season, that we are just as equal to this land as everything else. We had to understand how everything worked, how all the runs, all the fish runs, how people mate, how they don't mate, how animals mate, how seasons change, what happens when season changes, and how much can you take without affecting it? How much can you leave without affecting it? How much can you take for your whole family? It took thousands of years to get that understanding and to make sure that it doesn't mess up here. And that there's always something left for tomorrow. There's always something left for the generations after and after. It took thousands of years to get that going. And they did that with the understanding that we are no better than anybody else. We are equal. Wet'suwet'en. I sprouted from this earth like the grass did. I sprouted it like the trees and the limbs and everything here. I am no better than them. And that's what they were trying to tell Edward Cornwallis. And that is the writing between every single lines in the treaties. That is what you're protecting. That concept, that way of life, and everything attached to it. All the teachings, all the language, all the traditions, all the family generations back and back. That's what you're protecting, that concept. That's what I like to think anyway. A lot of people don't get to see it or hear it that way. But that was a very important letter. And it brought a lot more appreciation into how Mi'kmaq people viewed war. How they viewed their place in the province among these nations, the French and the British, and the war that they were at. And what we were fighting for, you know. We didn't view ownership the same way. We didn't view owning the land the same way. It wasn't even important. Was not important, because how do you own it? How does someone over the seas have control over it? This is a very foreign concept for a long time, and I think it is still very foreign. And it still will always be, until people understand the same point of view of living on the land and being part of the land. But unfortunately, it's not happening, and we're losing species, and we're losing habitats, and we're losing resources every year, and climate is changing, and the loss of species is proof of that. But can't sign treaties with Mother Nature, unfortunately.
Who is Father Leloutre?
Father Leloutre is a whole nother talk. He was the Father Rail of the conflicts that led up to the 1752 treaty. And very responsible for the expulsion, not fully responsible, but he had a lot to play into the expulsion of Acadians and where they were expelled, and the conflicts that led to the English all over. All the events that led up to the Peace and Friendship Treaty of 1752, Father Leloutre was believed to be behind. And he was painted an enemy of the crown, like Father Rail was, but by Edward Cornwallis. Edward Cornwallis, I think, started believing the same things about Leloutre. And Leloutre even had an assistant by the name of Pierre Maillard, who was a linguist and helping him. And Pierre Maillard ended up being the most important linguist for Mi'kmaq people, because he was there in 1761, 10 years later, helping with those peace and friendship treaties. So Leloutre was believed to be a warmonger and priest a lot like Liam Neeson in Gangs of New York as well. But I think he was just a victim of English propaganda as well. I didn't see him as what was written about him. He was very much trying to learn language. He was very much trying to learn the culture and traditions. But he wasn't as good as Maillard was. And with them together, they were able to record a lot of Mi'kmaq history. And but Lelouch was a leader, and he did lead attacks on the British. So he was a bad guy sometimes. But that again is a whole nother conversation, and we could actually talk a whole lot about everything
Well,
Lelouch
the
did.
British were trying to suppress the Catholics, weren't they? So Lelouch would try to get the Acadians and the Mi'kmaq to fight against them, because Catholics didn't vote in this province until 1825 or something like that.
Yeah, there was a plan of bringing Protestants here that really shaped the history here in Nova Scotia. And the difference between Catholics and the Protestants really did shape land ownership here, and the treaty process. The plan to push Acadians out in 1755 was under the basis of not just getting rid of them and the Acadians are no longer here. It was really trying to get Protestants here. How do we get Protestants living here that it's overcrowded in New England? Super overcrowded. Even in the 1740s, leading up to the 1760s, it's overcrowded in New England. And they're filled with Protestants, and there's war constantly there, and they're trying to leave. And to get Catholics out and get Protestants in is to make this a very English place. So yes, they were coming down on Catholics because there was, I think there was a push to just get more Protestants here, and that's what ended up happening in many parts of Nova Scotia after the expulsion, which is also another separate talk on its own.
So Trevor, so thank you for your presentation tonight. It was very enlightening. I certainly can relate to your history because at the last talk that I had sat into were two Indigenous individuals who spoke about the Mi'kmaq traditions. And it was funny because there was a gentleman in the audience who kind of spoke about what he had learned in school in his history. And I said to him that his history was different than the history that I was taught. I am French Acadian, and a lot of the ways that the Mi'kmaq protected the land, how they survived, were passed down to my people, my generation, because my grandparents, and even from my great-parents' stories, they're similar to yours, to protecting the culture and to protecting where we lived. Now, on another topic, what is the expectation of the Mi'kmaq when we want to use the acknowledgement of the traditional land treaty? That we are on unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, and so does one seek permission from that particular Mi'kmaq nation or Mi'kmaq district in order to present that you are acknowledging that treaty?
That's a very long question.
I'm sorry.
I got an answer for you that I think that might cover that.
Okay.
I think what you're asking here is what's the expectation of Mi'kmaq people in non-Indigenous people understanding their side of the treaty. I think one of the most important things for all Canadian citizens to understand, all Canadian citizens, regardless if you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, and this is a really hard thing for people to understand, is that if you're from Canada, born in Canada, your ancestors are from Canada, you live in Canada, you're a citizen of Canada, you are a treaty person just as much as I am.
Right.
These treaties are for you just as much as they are for me, because we established peace and friendship, and we needed to get along peacefully on this land then, and we need to keep doing it now to practice it. And I also agree with your thoughts on Acadians' appreciation of our culture, even if it's not language. You know, I grew up in Buckingek, and some of the best eel spear makers are from Pumpket, and Tragedy, you know, I go into Tragedy a lot to get some of the best eel spears because some of the best eel fishermen are French guys that live out in Harbour Bushy or Frankville or Pumpkin. And we still have good relationships with them now.
Yeah.
Great relationships.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope that answers your question. I think even right now, talking like this, I hope you guys have an understanding that these peace and friendship treaties that were signed, they weren't just for Mi'kmaq people and protecting their fishing rights and protecting their hunting rights for time immemorial. This was to make peace and friendship with your ancestors as well. And the development of this country plays a big, big part on those treaties signing, because if they didn't sign, then the war would have continued. British people may not have been able to create Halifax, and the town may not have been built, and more immigrants may not have came into Nova Scotia. It could have been a very, very different place if the treaties weren't signed. And that being signed, and the province being a different place, then the country itself would have been a very, very different place. Because controlling that port of Halifax is very important for the development of Canada as a country. And if they didn't, and if the Mi'kmaq still, controlled it forever, then again, it would have been a very different place. But the country itself based its relationships on other Indigenous nations after these treaties here were signed. The government, started to get in a hang of how you deal with Indigenous people, and that started here in our territories, that treaty-making process.
Tied to that, does anybody talk about the Friendship Accord that was signed in 2018? I never hear it mentioned in any of the land acknowledgements that I've been hearing people say. Has it been active, or has anybody else signed?
In 2018?
Yeah, between Chief Paul Prosper and Owen McCarron.
Of here, of town.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. It is brought up all the time. I don't think it's brought up publicly, but I've been invited to town council chambers a few times, and I gave a presentation on the name of Nalagishkunish as well. They invited me because of this video that I made, and I think that had a lot to do about what Chief PJ did, but it was also when we were, I don't know if you guys have been to the powwow that we had at St. FX and the event that we held there. Conversations that we had with the town and St. FX brought that accord that PJ came in, and also Chief Duma affirmed, and Chief Corey was behind. So yeah, it does, but it's unique to here. I don't think it's discussed in all of Mi'kmaq territory that Bachangek and the town of Antigonish have a peace accord. But yes, I've heard of it and I've got to experience it, and I think it's still ongoing. And that this place here, expressing the Nalagishkunichkling, it's a big deal for me, big deal for the community, big deal. Just growing up in the community and being separated from this town for a long time. It's hard to find your place in a town that almost you don't feel welcomed at sometimes. And the whole town itself is saying a Mi'kmaq word every single day, not knowing they're saying a Mi'kmaq word. Where does Antigonish come from? It comes from Nalagishkunish. So everyone is saying Antigonish, saying a Mi'kmaq place, but not knowing that they are acknowledging Mi'kmaq people on this land for thousands of years, doing so. Which is the reason why I made that video, and educate people on Nalagishkunish and how it changed over the matter of years to Nalagishkunish to Antigonish. And now everyone living in this town now hopefully has the understanding that they are acknowledging Mi'kmaq people every single day when they say the name Antigonish. Does that answer your question? A little bit?
And I'm glad to hear it.
Anyone else have any questions?
Maybe if I will, if that's okay, I may encourage us to continue our conversation as we have our bed lunch in the back room.
There's lunch?
There's lunch, of course there's lunch. So Trevor, I just want to take an opportunity to say thank you, Bilal, for this presentation, for taking the time. And I suspect everyone here has come away with at least something we didn't know before, if not a lot of things. And I think what I took away from this, at least a key term, is understanding. So time and time again you talked about the fact that there was a lack of understanding. That particularly the people who came into Mi'kmaq didn't understand. And in the course of making treaty, there was a lack of understanding. And so that's why it's so important that we put the effort into trying to understand. because there wasn't enough effort on the part of many of the people who came to Mi'kmaq to understand the entire worldview of the people that were already here and had been for thousands of years. So even if you're able to take away that from tonight and take away Nalagich Gunich and explain that to one person, so that when next time they say Anganish, because we have people come into the museum and the first thing I ask them is, do you have an understanding of the name? Half of them, of course, the third way they can't pronounce it, but they might assume it's a Gaelic name because of the strong Scottish tradition here. And I said, no, and so we talked about the Mi'kmaq. So if you can go away tonight with that pronunciation, or a version of it, because language is a journey for all of us, then you're taking what Trevor's been trying has talked to us about tonight and what he's done through his YouTube presence, and take that another step further and work towards understanding. Because I think because from understanding can come just about all the other good things that we need to come. So thank you, my friend, very much. Folks, thank you very much for your participation, for your patience this evening, and please come in, have a cup of tea, have something sweet to eat, and carry on the conversation. Thanks very much.
I thought it was good.